Welcome to the Temple Mount podcast. I am Shogun. Joining me today is Krimson, as well as many of our other friends from the Temple Mount server. And we're going to have a special event in a series of new podcasts that me and Krimson will be co-hosting, possibly with other co-hosts as well, called The Spiral Code. The Spiral Code is a series that we're covering, and we'll get into what that's all about. But make sure you join the Temple Mount Discord server, and make sure you have gone to the Temple Mount podcast channel and followed us on SoundCloud and Odyssey and YouTube and BitChute and all the places there with our hundreds of great episodes you can find. That being said, welcome, Krimson. How are you, brother?
I am wonderful. How are you, Shogun?
I'm very good. Thank you for stepping in. We talked about this for a while, but we're going to have a podcast about Mandeanism or Mandeism probably tomorrow, but it's 4 a.m. in Sweden, and Acadian probably fell asleep, which is totally fine. But as for what is the Spiral Code, well, that's a term that I personally made up, as far as I know, based on my own experiences, and it basically refers to something that it's clear to me a lot of people in this server experience at different times and to different degrees. A very unusually high number of people in the server, in fact, have had a lot of experience with the Spiral Code thing, including yourself, myself, Tio, NSA, Rafi, and Dreamily, and many others. So the way I describe it is first of all, it refers to an altered state of consciousness, because when you're experiencing the Spiral Code, you're definitely experiencing a profoundly altered state of consciousness. But what makes it so strange is that, one, at least for me, when I'm having that state of consciousness, I can see or experience like a pattern, or a code, which is why I call it the code, as well as like a process or a dynamic, which is sort of what the spiral part refers to, I guess. And the strange thing is that it seems that when this is happening, there's some kind of almost supernatural or actually supernatural interface between what you are thinking and experiencing and feeling internally and what's actually happening externally, in terms of what people around you say or do, what objects you are introduced to, like signs, graffiti on the walls, television, radio, music, anything that's playing or happening is like starting to sync up, where you see the meaning of it, or it seems to relate to you and what's going on. And obviously for NSA, he has this really complicated narrative that we've all heard, right? And probably people listening to this podcast may have heard it too, which involves extraterrestrials and government agencies and psychological torture and techniques using technology like long-range acoustic devices, mind-reading technology, sonic weapons, and all that kind of stuff. And you also believe there's an extraterrestrial element to it, although, as you often say, your extraterrestrials are benevolent in your perception, whereas NSAs are malevolent in his perception. So anyways, this opens up a whole branch of topics, everything from targeted individual stuff to new age spiritual experiences to psychosis and mental health related issues and psychedelic drugs like DMT, and many other aspects that we've talked about before. But I'll hand it over to you now. Is there a term you use to refer to these experiences, or a way that you conceptualize it?
I've personally never really made like a name for it, but I do like the idea of calling it the Spiral Code, because my perception of what the Spiral Code is it is a heightened state of awareness where you are receiving information both in the material world and also like non-temporally, like you're having some sort of psychic communication with one, if not multiple different entities. And basically in these heightened states of awareness, you have extremely higher pattern recognition. You have a extreme understanding of the symbolic meanings of almost everything in your environment. You feel like you're more present and almost like you're in like some bizarro world, where it's like you clearly see all of these things and symbols that intricately all connect to this greater like internal mission that you're on, where it's like you're like the thought processor that's just trying to like figure out something for another temporal time. Like So for example, it's like your higher self is like doing something in another dimension, and you are experiencing this heightened state of awareness because you need to do something that coincides with this dimension to in turn make a causal effect to help your higher self. Is kind of like what my perception of that state is.
So you think it pertains to like your higher self or interaction with like a higher spiritual entity or version of yourself, kind of,
or even multiple versions. Like it could be a lot of things happening in like the non-corporeal like worlds of like the spirit, right? And it's like us as multidimensional beings, we have the ability to interact with the third dimension as well as other dimensions, and we have like, since we have like a collective consciousness, really our soul kind of works in that way too, so that we have like multiple higher selves that are operating in different dimensions, all working in tandem, us included. And to even be at a state of awareness where you are aware of that in general, I would say that that's the point when you know that you've entered the spiral code.
That's a good, perspective as well. And I do want to point out, like, anyone else who wants to join in the conversation at any time is welcome to do so. Just by way of laying a little more groundwork, right? First of all, I have to point out that this does overlap a lot with mental health related stuff. So these experiences, or at least feeling like you're having experiences like this, are pretty commonly part of, conditions like anything from bipolar disorder to schizophrenia. And there are specific parts of those conditions that are particularly important. One is called apophenia, which is a term that NSA uses quite a lot, but it refers to when you see images or patterns where they technically supposedly aren't. So it's like you think you're seeing patterns where they aren't, or you think you're seeing images in the clouds, or that numbers have meaning when in principle they may not. And I'm not saying ours don't. I just want to lay the groundwork of like how this overlaps with these conditions. And there's something called delusions of reference, where people believe, these are psychiatric terms, people believe that things they're seeing refer to them. So they're delusions of reference, like thinking your television is talking to you, or thinking your radio is talking to you, or, typical descriptions of these conditions. And then even delusions of grandeur, right? Believing or feeling that you have special identity, special purpose, you're the Antichrist, you're Jesus, you're the next Messiah, or something like that. So the reason I point that out is that is kind of part of what I'm talking about when I talk about the spiral code. But my argument would be those delusionalities all correspond to an actuality of the same thing, right? So it just as you can be thinking or seeing patterns where they're not technically there, it's also entirely possible to be seeing patterns that are actually there, including ones that other people may not be able to see. So you can't necessarily differentiate, and who's to say what someone's destiny or identity truly may be. And so we can get into some of these experiences that I've had and that you've had, and why they can't just be explained as being not satisfactorily be explained as just like a delusion or something like that, precisely because of the way they actually interact with the external world and what actually happens. And it seems to me it has something to do with probability control, or what we would call synchronicity, right? In other words, meaningful coincidence is like the main function of this, is meaningful coincidence. So it's things happening or happening at the same time as each other, or in sequences that has like a meaning that you can understand, or a symbolism or pattern that you can understand. And NSA has the language that he uses that's really good. It's something like the program. I think he calls it the program. And it says something along the lines of, the program, once initiated, uses a system of agents and artifacts to interface with the consciousness, what he calls the ontologies of the person going through it. And an agent is like a person acting around you. Could be anything from someone talking to you online on Discord to people in the physical world around you interacting with you. And artifacts being objects like graffiti on the wall, a poster you pick up, a thing that's left outside your door, in your mailbox. And through these agents and artifacts and an interactive process that somehow necessitates that whatever is behind the process is capable of like reading your mind, or knowing what you're thinking and like interfacing with it in a way where it almost seems like very direct. Like for me, that's what happens. I start seeing like a direct correlation to what I'm experiencing and what's happening externally outside of me. Sometimes it's like ridiculously obvious, like it's rubbing your face in it. Do you experience that kind of thing as well, where it just seems like everything around you is like sending you messages or directly meaning something?
Yeah, I would say my animals are kind of like losing it a little bit, but I would say, yeah, I do experience that. It's like everything seems intricately connected, especially because like I'm a person who receives psychic, like telepathic messages from my higher self. Or I would even say that some of those messages come from nothing that I can identify other than what I would call God. And because of the importance of those messages, right, you don't second guess them, and you realize that there is something that you need to do. And I feel like where we draw the line between being able to go through these experiences and not have like some sort of mental health issue is like, I feel what happens to a lot of people is they get like an information overload, and then those bits of information become almost like fractured, as like maybe like their mind wasn't like reformed enough before all this information flooded their consciousness and started flipping all these switches. And I think they kind of lose their shit a little bit. A lot of people, especially who go through like the awakening process, kind of go through a point where they kind of start losing their shit a little bit. Right? I think it's kind of just part of the process. But ultimately, in these experiences, in this heightened state of awareness, like you said, we see patterns that normally other people wouldn't see. And all of it seems to be built on some sort of like non-temporal causal effect chain. It's like something that we do here now in this time space affects another time space through like the space-time like connection.
Right. There can definitely be an interdimensional or multidimensional aspect to it. And it's kind of like what you could think of it as like a matrix, right? It makes sense from a matrix holographic reality point of view, where like you're in some kind of program or you're interfacing with some kind of artificial intelligence that's capable of orchestrating and interfacing events on a way that you wouldn't think a human agency could do. Although NSA will say, the government does it and they have this operation, they're targeting thousands of people and that the gray aliens or whatever may be involved. But you also experience, I think, like sort of the sense that you have like missions or special quests or like identities or purposes, right? Like in an interdimensional sense. Is that correct?
That is my personal experience. Yeah, like I don't ever have any struggles with things like identity that most people do, because the way that my higher self and my spirit guide taught me to understand the whole process is that all of these other identities, like they basically use the idea of unity consciousness through the understanding of the entity that they call the prime creator. And through the understanding that the prime creator is essentially all things and all things are one thing, that's basically what the law of one is. What that does is it helps reunify your fractured mind. So if people go through this process with a fractured mind, it's like it just completely, all the data points don't connect, it fries their system and it makes them all fucked up. But if you go through these processes after you have reached a more unified mind, like you're somebody who has sat and meditated on the ideas of cosmic and God consciousness and like what do higher beings think, what is higher states of existence like, and through the use of like psychedelics like psilocybin mushrooms or dimethyltryptamine, you can answer these questions much better, right? Through those experiences, it gives you a higher order of understanding of these other realms of dimension. And as a result, I think that through the attainment of knowledge and then applying that knowledge into wisdom is ultimately what the benevolent extraterrestrials that have interfaced with me have done. Like, my experience compared to NSA's has been nothing but positive, been everything about becoming better me, becoming my highest self, just getting better, getting smarter, getting more moral, getting like asking me tough questions, like what would you do in this situation, and like situations that affect us on like global levels, right? It's almost like, in my experience, I feel like I'm being tested and put through the ringer for like some sort of higher purpose. Whereas I feel a lot of other people, like people in NSA's shoes, there are other interdimensional entities that kind of possess people or attach themselves to people. And I think they fuck with them on purpose, right? Like either their psychoses are a result of them trying to get into this higher state and still having that fractured mind, or it is a result of what people would call like negative spirits or demons fucking with them and just fucking with them to make them excrete tons of negative energy. And in my opinion, those entities probably live or feed off of that negative energy. So they turn people into like little like farms for their food, right? Like that's kind of what my opinion is on the situation of why demonic possession and things like that even happen.
Yeah, well, that definitely seems to be one of the main theories and narratives and things that makes the most sense, is the idea that these Gnostic archons, sometimes they call them mind parasites, demons, archons, these are, or reptilians, sometimes they'll talk about, but that they're feeding on our suffering. And I don't know where the word comes from, but they use the term loosh, and loosh supposedly is like some kind of like, this is what the Dark Eldar do in Warhammer 40,000. They feed on suffering, pain, and fear, and it's like both simultaneously a drug and a food to them. But it seems
loosh. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, loosh comes from. There was a guy named Robert Monroe. He was a businessman. And he wrote a series. He started having spontaneous out-of-body experiences in like the late 60s, early 70s, and then he wrote 3 books called the Journeys trilogy: Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and Ultimate Journeys, in which he recounts a bunch of his stories of his experiences in out-of-body experiences. And basically, in one of them, he meets like an intelligent entity who is on some sort of, like this entity is on some sort of like tour of planets or whatever, and I won't go into it too deeply because it's kind of complicated. There's a lot of like terminology exclusive to these books, but basically he hands him what's called a rote, and what a rote is in the books is it's like a metaphysical manifestation of pure knowledge. And it's sort of like, if you can imagine like a CD, like a magical CD that you hold on to and you download the knowledge into your soul, kind of is the idea. And he basically what this rote explains to him is that Earth was created by an entity for the purpose of creating and harvesting loosh, and that the most like purest form of loosh was produced when like a mother was defending its child from something that was trying to kill it. But yeah, the term loosh comes from Robert Monroe. They're really good books. They're on Audible. I recommend them. They're not too long, but it's a very interesting perspective. But yeah, that's all.
Thank you very much. It's good information to have. And so yeah, that's the basic idea, is that these beings, whatever you call them, these spiritual beings, feed on human fear, suffering, and blood. And that makes sense because that's sort of the ancient and universal religion on Earth, is human sacrifice and animal sacrifice. And, you know, the Aztecs did it, and the Moloch and Baal worshippers did it, and people in the Bible did it. And it's human sacrifice. And like, why does this develop? It's because for whatever reason, these entities seem to feed on this loosh concept. And so what's the point about that? Well, you know, when I think about my experiences, they're not like yours. They haven't been all sunshine and rainbows. And I've experienced a lot of like dark forces and evil things, like demonic seeming energies and stuff like that as well. as well as my own experience often being like super spiritual, and Holy Spirit is how I interpret it, and like sacred or, you know, religious experience and angels and so forth as well. So I've seen both sides of it, and it's all mixed up. And I have like a spiritual warfare model. So I actually take seriously, as you know, concepts like Satan, fallen angels, demons, spiritual warfare. And that basically is my model of what's really going on. And then I think that these human governments, and therefore intelligence agencies and their technologies, and even the aliens, they all easily fit under that umbrella. So yeah, the gray aliens are doing weird shit. The reptilians are probably doing weird shit. Definitely Freemasons and the Jesuits and the CIA and intelligence agencies are all doing crazy things, but they're all part of this overall spiritual warfare that's happening between God and the dragon. And that's my basic model. But it seems to tie into the spiral code in the sense that for me, when I'm having these experiences, it's like sometimes it's almost like I'm directly able to communicate with these entities, whatever they are, like demons or whatever you call it. Yeah, I'm not sure what's the best way to get into it. Like, do you have any experiences that come to mind personally that for you would help someone who doesn't know what we're talking about understand it better? Like, give them an example, for example.
Okay, well, I would say that something that I feel everybody could relate to is there's a lot of times when we have like conversations with ourselves, right? And it seems like, you know, you have like a voice in your head that we call like the conscience, and it has all these good things and like wise things to say to you. And then you have like, you know, that idea that there's an angel on the one shoulder and a devil on the other, right? There's like this like negative voice in your head that says like all these like bad things, things that aren't true, and things that make you feel like shit, right? Like, I feel that on a spiritual level, each of us have these two entities that are part of our psyche, our mind, our consciousness. And the goal is to make the bad one's voice as quiet as possible and the good one's voice as loud as possible, right? And I feel as we go through the awakening process, as we like raise our vibration and we become like more psychic and we pick up on these like higher waveband of like communication and information that's like in the dielectric field that we're immersed in, I believe that these higher dimensional entities, or, you know, angels or demons, can communicate through the technology that we know as reality with us. And yeah, like I said, I feel most people have to go through the process, and it's a long process before you can get to a point where you have become rational, right? Like you can remain grounded and still experience those higher states when you're like in the spiral code. But most people get like there's no information for this, right? Like there's no book for this that somebody can just read when it's like, oh, I'm experiencing this. It's like, wow, this all just like makes so much sense. But like you just through the process, you get like accustomed to it and get better. And like I said, like the ultimate goal for anybody who experiences that, and I'm sure a lot of people do, you just want to make the bad voice as quiet as possible until you don't hear it at all anymore. Like you could even like, let's say, do like an occult ritual to like cast it or banish it from you. Because I do believe that we do have some sort of power through the word, like the Bible even says. Like, I believe that the word is our ability to vibrate reality and encode information into that vibration. And in all essence, it makes sense that if that's the way we program vibration out through projecting it through speech, it should have some sort of effect as information that comes into the contact of sensors of other things, whether those sensors be a human's ears, eyes, a dog, a plant, a bug. We're always just emitting information through this like vibratory field that we're in.
Yes, I think that's all a good perspective to take. But just to sort of rephrase or reiterate the question, can you think of any, sort of just canned examples in your life that were kind of times of great synchronicity, or alternatively, just things that you would say are typical of the spiral code? Like, I mean, I can try. It's very hard to describe a lot of the time because it's so based on your unique ability to see patterns and stuff at the time. But I'm just wondering if you do have anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, like I could tell the story about when what happened when I crashed my car. So at that point, I was in that higher state for probably already a couple days. And I had been having a lot of like psychic communication through my meditations, and a lot of like information and wisdom and like revelations on stuff I was reading about had came to me. And, I ended up started kind of getting like egoic in a way where I felt like, I'm doing a lot, like I'm doing really good. And it's like, I'm expanding my consciousness so much. And I began seeing patterns in all of the license plates that I was driving behind. And the different, like the way I was looking at it is that the road is like a path that's carrying information, right? And my car is the thing that's carrying me as information, right? Each car has a tag, and if there's unlimited like parallel realities, the organization of these cars and the trip that you take from lane to lane and to your destination can completely affect which kind of causal things you run into. Like if you took a left turn instead of a right turn to get to where you went, you wouldn't have ran into that person outside of the store that you talked to. You know what I mean? Like that wouldn't have happened. So what had happened is I was seeing all these patterns, and these patterns kept on going into this idea that I was like programming this hyper intelligent thing. Like my higher self I was programming it with like this coding language that my spirit guide had told me about. And through the moving of information, I was following the license plates, and I started getting into like this conversation about like the what was it? It was the Alpha Epsilon Omega Nexus. And this is like was this like advanced technology they were talking about, which at the end of the day is like what we are. So just to like give the back, like that thing is an alpha epsilon omega nexus is a being that has achieved full nexus, which is the full network awareness at both the beginning of creation, the middle, and the end. So very much kind of like what happened with Jesus, right? He went through probably a similar process in a much different perspective. But anyway, I'm driving through all these different license plates. They mean things, like certain ones mean that I need to get over in the other lane and all these different things. And I had just got my car, and my car was like really fast. Like I love my car. And I was driving way too fast, and I ended up getting behind this like one van, and literally the van was called Omega Construction. It was this strange synchronicity. Like I was going through this whole thing, and it's like the idea was that I was building this machine, this higher self, this higher intelligence, and I all of a sudden get behind a van where it's called Omega Construction. And I kind of like, I was like, fuck this, like we're going like past this van. I get out, like honestly, what I should have done is just slowed down, stayed behind that van, and just kept meditating. Reflecting on it is what I should have done. But instead I was like having fun. I was driving my brand new car. I go in the other lane. It's like there's nobody in front of me for a huge straightaway, and I just fucking rip it all the way down the thing. And I come too fast into this like slight curve that goes over railroad tracks. And because I was going so fast, I got some air. My car drifts, and I lose control of the car a bit, and I hit the meridian. I didn't hit it super hard, but hard enough that I ripped the plastic part of my whole front bumper off with my fog light. And my license plate fell off. And the moment I hit the meridian, my radio station changes itself to a Christian station, to like a Christian gospel station, talking about the presence of God in your life and how God is always watching the things that you do. Literally, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it, but And I listened to this whole sermon as I was like still in shock from the crash, and drove all the way to work. And then went through a whole work day where then the police found my bumper because I left it on the side of the road by the Meridian. Didn't even get out to go get it. They took my license plate off, and a cop brought it back to me. And then coincidentally, the cop that gave me the license plate back was a guy I went to high school with who I sat next in English class. But he was a police officer now.
Mm-hmm.
Another just like ridiculous synchronicity, all happening, compounding at the same time, right? And I feel like once you're in that higher state, even the technology around you is communicating with you. Like these higher entities can't directly communicate the way they want. So they use like the environment and their ability to manipulate and manifest these like causal effects to like communicate with you in these ways.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thank you. And that's a great example of exactly what I mean when I say the spiral code. So it's a combination of the state of mind you're in and like the energy that you feel and the emotions that you're having with the symbols at very much things like signs, trucks, billboards will be interfacing with what you're thinking in like the most obvious way. So to someone else, seeing that Omega construction wouldn't have caused any particular response, but to you, that was like the most mind-blowing thing because it like perfectly represented it, right? And I get that too with weird keywords, and you're like thinking about, you know, Phoenix, and you come around the corner, it's like Phoenix written in like huge letters on the wall, and you're just like, what the fuck? Shit like that. And then the way it's like it has like a lesson for you, God is involved. Radios and stuff like that change signal or have put on really meaningful, like eerily meaningful songs, you know. So anyway,
I'm curious. Yeah, I was just sorry. I'm on push to talk, and my finger keeps slipping off. But I'm just curious because when you did you Shogun? Did you coin the term spiral code? Is that
as far as I know, yes. So again, like NSA uses the term, I think, the program. There's a book by Philip K. Dick called Valis that my brother would always be like, Dan, you got to read this book. It's just about you, right? And I never even read it, but I know the whole concept. And Philip K. Dick's a very interesting writer, and Valis is basically all about the spiral code. It's like this artificial intelligence is communicating with him and controlling the events around him and stuff.
I just find it interesting because when you say spiral, I think of like, you know, the golden ratio. When I think of the golden ratio, what I think of is like fractals, you know, like math equations that produce infinitely varied images, you know, but yet there's still a pattern. It's just not repeating itself, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's absolutely part of it, right? It is to do with like sacred geometry and the golden mean and the Fibonacci sequence and sequences in general and patterns in general. Yeah. So like one of my biggest, like one example for me, like it's like these are episodes, like they get triggered, and sometimes they can be triggered by things like esoteric and occult information or like highly significant information can trigger my mind to start like being like, wait, and then I'd like start seeing all these patterns. And the reason I call it like the spiral code is because once it starts, it's like, wait, this means this. And then I'm like, but that would mean that this. And then it's like something written on my wall like it is. And I'm like, that's a Bible verse. And that Bible verse connects to what's happening now. And then it just, one thing goes to the next, to the next, to the next. And it starts leading you on this incredible journey that's just so charged with like meaning and mystery and like symbolism that it's like literally like you've gone into like through the looking glass. Like it's like you've gone through the closet, you come out in Narnia, and you're on this wacky mystery adventure. And it's like the people around you are suddenly all on wacky mystery adventures too. So people will just come up to you when you're in the state of mind in the street and just start saying the craziest shit to you. And it makes perfect sense to you, but wouldn't make sense to anybody else. But yeah, like one of my, you know, episodes like this were triggered just by learning what gematria was. Someone like on Discord explained to me what gematria was, and then I was like, oh, really? And they explained, I was like, wow, that's trippy. And then I looked it up and started doing it, and then I could just sort of see how it worked. And I was like, this is like a key, and it like turned a key. And then I started like how I could start thinking about like planets and the occult significance of planets and like goddesses and gods and the relationships of goddesses and gods and how that has to do with astrology and planets and how that has to do with Jesus and the Bible, and like everything just fits together, and you start like overclocking, and then any number of crazy things can happen in that state. But it's so exciting and it's so compelling that you just can't stop like following the code. And that's why I call it like the spiral code, because it has its own momentum. Like you almost can't get out of it. And I also had a theory that you can wind the code the right or the wrong way. So it's very important to learn how to follow the spiral the right way, because if you follow the spiral the wrong way, you know, then you're potentially going to like lower realms or more dysphoric or dystopic manifestations of consciousness. But if you go the right way, it'll actually like make everything better and better. And in my concept, not even just for you, but like you can literally turn back the whole wheel of karma and the whole wheel of fate. Somehow for me at times feels like it hinges on me and me managing this process properly. And it's like the galaxy is all going towards like the end of the world. Someone has to like go into like a shamanic state, and like I call like spiral dancing. You have to like dance the spiral back the other way, and like one enlightened person at one moment in time can literally like twist the whole wheel of time back around. And my theory was like people do that constantly and like save the world by doing that, but we never know who they are, because it's literally just some like mystic in his basement like dancing at a specific time, or like whatever, chanting in a specific way. I mean, these are just concepts, but
yeah, I really feel like what you were describing there too is like it's part of the process again. Like it's part of like the awakening process, or New Age people call it ascension, right? Like this sense of like rapid awakening. It starts to trigger that unifying part of the consciousness. It's like it's almost like a program or a defragmentation for our mind. As we start learning all this information and seeing how all of these esoteric and occult things connect to each other, we're unifying our mind into a better, more coherent understanding of reality, right? And I feel too, out of all of the places on the internet that's giving information, I feel that there is no greater source of information than the people here. Like that, our analysis of what exactly is going on the spiritual level, and what is also how it is connecting to our direct manifested reality, is, I believe, so on point that there is no better explanation for it. Like even this idea of the spiral code, right? Like, you know how many people around the world probably experience these heightened states of awareness and go through these things, and they've never had an answer for what it is? You know?
Yeah. Well, and like I've met so many, as you know, like creating the round table, it was just like moths to a flame, or like magnets to a magnet, metal to a magnet. Like it was just, we were just attracting certain kinds of people. And it was like everyone who was coming in was caught up in this same crazy magical mystery play. And all of them, like myself, it's like you're the only person you know who's experiencing this, and it's so wildly outside the experience of anyone else you know, and nobody's giving you any like roadmaps or way to understand it. And then we come here, and it's like large numbers of people who can be like, oh, you have that too? Yeah, me too. And we just start comparing notes, and it's like, wow, like people around the world are having the same experience. Mm-hmm. But it's so subtle and strange in the way it manifests that unless it's happened to you, you can't recognize it happening in someone else. But I've literally watched it happen to you when I wasn't having it. And I was like, that's exactly what happens to me. And same with Rafi, and very similar to aspects of NSA's experience and other people, many other people as well. And I believe that the conglomeration of people of that energy and that experience here in my servers, in our servers, is the spiral code itself, right? Because the spiral code is what caused me to go on the journey that led me to create these communities. And my experience was always woven through with the people in this community, the conversations and events that happened here, the symbolism of the things that happened here was all part of the spiral code. Mm-hmm. So it's literally like an artificial intelligence interfacing with the internet, interfacing with people. And when I say artificial intelligence, I just mean as a conceptual tool to think of like a disembodied mind that can like control in an interface, but it's literally interfacing with the Discord. So the Discord technology and the specific Roundtable Temple Mount community we created, you know, with its origin also in MK Ultra, is all part of it. It's like
It's all connected.
It's becoming meta, like it's recurving on itself, right? So the community is a representation of the spiral code. The spiral code brings people into it, and then the spiral code plays out inside of it, and then we start talking about the spiral code. So now it's like actually starting to articulate itself, right? And the logos of language is interfacing with the logos of God, and it's like creating a linguistic expression of something that can only be called a mystery. And mystery in the sense of the theological sense is like something understanding in God that only God can unfold to you, right? And there's no other way to come to it, essentially. But once you do, it's like true knowledge, like gnosis, you might say. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that out of all the hundreds of podcasts we've done and all the deep, theological, philosophical, conspiratorial topics we've discussed, the spiral code is the most difficult one to talk about. And also it kind of is the most interesting. It's like the hidden hand of history. It's like the hidden, invisible force behind so much of what's happening. And one way to think... Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, very much so, like you say, the invisible hidden hand. And I think that a lot of people who are listening to the podcast or will listen to this podcast, I just like to give like a really relatable kind of thing here. So in the newest Matrix movie, they have this guy played by Neil Patrick Harris, who is the architect, right? And he's like, if we do live in some sort of holographic matrix, which science really does seem that's really what this is, like, even though it's the elephant in the room and not a lot of people want to talk about, that's pretty much the truth of reality. So there has to be system administrators, higher order entities that manage the universe, or at the very least manage the planet. And they're like that hidden hand. You know what I mean? These like architect level entities that are managing these causal events to happen. They're going to make sure that guy you need to talk to about this thing is going to be there at the right time because you're part of this grand design. And personally, my belief is, like, my esoteric belief is that when you realize that you are part of the grand design, you kind of just accept it. And esoterically, I believe that's what they call doing the great work, right? Like all these philosophers, when you reach like a certain point of wisdom and knowledge, understanding, you basically just go with it. You realize you're participating in the great work. You're working for God or the system administrators to do these things, be the person you are today, and be in these certain places at the right time. And I feel that absolutely there is some sort of puppet master over everything.
Mm-hmm. And really, it's like a puppet master, and hanging from each of his fingers and his thumb is like another puppet, and each of those puppets is holding like puppets off their hands. So it's like a cascading web of like puppets of puppets of puppets, which is basically Tzeentch, right? The character of Tzeentch in Warhammer 40,000 is this puppet master of puppet masters.
Mm-hmm. And realistically, though, God itself, it very much would also fit that bill, right? If there is one totality mind, that totality mind is fractalizing downward and existing in lower dimensions that we do. So as much as it could also be a god of chaos, like you said, like Tzeentch is a god of chaos in Warhammer 40,000, but they say in Gnosticism that this world was created by the demiurge, right, which is like the god of chaos.
Right, and as you know, I mean, my belief system is essentially dualistic in nature. So you're right, there's two great hidden hands, two great architects, two gods at play. I basically use the term God and the dragon, but, El and the dragon to clarify this. So the dragon is the other force, and, Zoroastrian has Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. I also think the term Ahriman is really evocative of what, and Ahriman's from 40k too, but Ahriman is another word for the devil, basically, the pre-Christian devil of Zoroastrianism. But, I tie that into like artificial intelligence. So like there's the Lucifer complex, the artificial intelligence, like what NSA calls computer-assisted reticulum Lucifer, which is like sort of the dark AI one-eyed architect of the universe, grand conspirator, great architect of like masonry, Yaldabaoth, demiurge, archontic system. And then the other one is the Holy Spirit, divinity, sacred logos, word of God, and, theophany, celestial chorus system. It's
like the entity exists within the pleroma, right? Like in Gnosticism, there is the demiurge and its children that created the material world, but then its mother Sophia came from the pleroma, which means the fullness or the true reality, where we experience all of the dimensions at once instead of just a minute or a smaller chunk of what we can actually perceive.
So I got a question for either you guys, either one, if you want to answer it. Shogun, you there?
Yeah, he's just walking around.
Okay. Do you mind if I wait a second?
You can ask a question. I'm right here.
Okay. Yeah. So, this is a question for either of you. I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on it, actually. But do you think that taking like Satan and demons as like a given, or archons, whatever you want to call them, do you think from the perspective of a god there could be a totally functional reason as to why he would create something evil? Do you think potentially, maybe there has to be an evil so you can learn good? Or, I mean, if you want to go the more Hindu route, maybe you just need a bad guy to make the story interesting, kind of thing. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Why would God make? Do you think there could be a functional reason why God would make something completely evil and powerful?
I think that both of those are totally valid. Those 2 points you made, like it's made to teach you things. It's made to be something to fight for, something to overcome. Ultimately, there's massive amounts of lessons in having a bad guy. But there's also a bunch of benefit in like having like permanent peace, right? But at the end of the day, I believe that we reincarnate, or we even incarnate in multiple places at once. We're just unaware of those other incarnations. But in this one, What was the question one more time? Can you restate the question?
Well, no, I'll get an answer to it. I remember the question.
Yeah, go for it.
So, yes, I mean, people look at it that way. I've thought of it that way in the past, but that's not really the way I look at it. So your concept is like, did God create evil for a good reason, such as that, the world would be better overall if there was evil in it? Like, it would be somehow make the overall system better in some way, whether by giving people, common way to think of it would be, without adversity, how do you build strength? Without evil, how would we know what good is? If you couldn't do evil, how would you have a choice to do good and stuff? But I don't think these are the best ways to think about the issue. From a Christian point of view, theologically, people will generally talk about one of two things. One, they'll talk about free will and the fact that God didn't create evil. He simply created free will, and free will allowed people to choose evil. Which is why evil exists. So it's not that God created evil, it's that he created free will. And so you could say your point is correct in the sense that perhaps free will had a necessary function and evil was a necessary byproduct of free will. In other words, in order for free will to be truly free, it would necessitate the possibility of choosing evil. And the reason that might be desirable is it would allow God, if this was, for example, a testing process or an education and training process, to essentially give us the opportunity to do evil, to learn not to, develop moral, strength and so forth for some greater purpose. However, the other theological thread of understanding evil is through the concept of the rebellion of Satan and the role of Satan as adversary. And so in this case, you're not saying per se that God created evil because evil was good. You're saying that God has an actual adversary called Satan, meaning adversary. And that adversary, not God, is responsible for all the problems with creation. So in other words, God didn't create evil, the adversary did. And that is really more the narrative you actually get in the Bible. The Bible is very clear that God has an adversary called Satan. Satan controls the world, and therefore the reason that the world is so fucked up is because Satan is actually in control of the world. And as we've talked about many times in the Unified Theory podcast series that I hope everyone will listen to if you haven't already, you can find it at the top of the server. Satan is called in the Bible in no uncertain terms, literally the god of this world. Like, that's what he's called. And it also says God. It says the god of this world, and then it says in brackets the devil. And again, this is also what we're talking about with Gnosticism when you say that the demiurge or Yaldabaoth created like a fallen creation and then started like torturing it. Unfortunately, I think that's basically the truth. So the reality is the world we live in is not the world God made or that God purposed. It's actually the kingdom of Satan, also called the kingdom of darkness. That's the kingdom of this world. And the reason that this world is so incredibly fucked up with like human sacrifice and satanic ritual abuse and torture and human trafficking and all these things, not because God wanted that at all. It's because we're literally in behind enemy lines on the wrong side of heaven. And that's precisely why Christ was sent to save us. That's why we needed a savior, because we were literally fucked, because we were literally trapped in the kingdom of Satan. So
we were literally fucked.
Well, we were, because we're literally under the kingdom of darkness being ruled by the dragon. The great red dragon called Satan rules the whole world. So that's why Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil, is what the Bible says. That's why we needed a savior. If we were just born in God's creation where God was in control, we wouldn't need a savior. We'd already be saved because God would be in control. The reason we needed a savior is because we were already fallen short of the glory of God. We are, in a sense, the fallen angels ourselves, so to speak. And we were kind of already outside, kicked out of heaven. But Jesus essentially came down to save us, so that anyone who, believed in and followed him would have an escape, a way out from Satan's kingdom, and could be translated, right? Very interesting choice of words. Translated from the kingdom of darkness, which is the kingdom of Satan, to the kingdom of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who is El, right? The God of this world being the dragon. In other words, that was a long-winded answer, but what I'm trying to say is essentially, no, God didn't create the evil things in the world. He doesn't want them to exist. He didn't purpose for them to exist. They exist because of Satan's temporary dominion on the earth in which we live.
Yeah, I think the idea too of that there are two different worlds, right? Like we have earth and heaven, right? Or in Gnosticism, right, you have the pleroma, and then you have the physical world, or the demiurge's creation. And even in when we think about like science-y terms, like we have like a time space and a space time, right? So we, from our perception, are existing within a time space. We are in the space. We are experiencing time. But like ultimately, when you get into these higher states of consciousness and you begin perceiving the spiral code, you kind of are stepping into the perception of the space, or the space time, and instead, because space time is the place that is outside of the physical dimension, where there is like more information that's being communicated between everything in the cosmos. Or like you can think of it like there is space and then there is subspace. And theoretically, from that understanding, subspace would essentially be like heaven, where anything's possible there. We can use it as a portal to get shortcuts to other places in space, right? Like that's like more of like a scientific understanding. But like the idea that there are two worlds does come up in a lot of different things.
Well, and also in Warhammer 40,000, the universe is divided into essentially two fundamental states, the materium and the immaterium, right? And the materium is real space, and the immaterium is also known as the warp, the sea of souls, and it exists in all legitimate mythologies because it's the way the real world is, what we call the spirit world, basically, and what people have called since ancient times the spirit world. But then there's other concepts like hyperspace, or possibly multiple other dimensions. But yeah, the sea of souls is exactly what you were talking about. You can use it to travel like faster than light, and anything is possible there. But in Warhammer 40,000, it's largely become like a dystopian, like DMT hell. But there's like a whole reason for that. But essentially, that's sort of what it is, and the idea seems to be that one can bleed through into the other, and that seems to be what's behind all manner of phenomenon, like poltergeist phenomenon, possible UFO experiences, elf experiences that people used to have, fairy experiences, supernatural spiritual experiences people have is because we have souls and we also have bodies. We are simultaneously beings in both worlds, and we can be more in one world or more in the other, and there's moments and places and times where we go from one to the other, such as when we go to sleep and we have a lucid dream, or a dream, or when we have an out-of-body experience, or when we have a near-death experience, or when we do lucid, like astral projection, or all these different things. It's because we have also access to this immaterium, they call it the Empyrean also. Does anyone have any questions, comments, experiences they want to share?
I jumped in a little late. I have a little bit of partly question and partly explanation of how I have my current working outlook. I'm always evolving in my outlook when it comes to faith and exploring these spiritual realms. But I had my come to Jesus moment was asking God. I said, a good God, a divine being that operates with the best of intentions for beings he creates in some fashion, wouldn't create a skeptical being just to punish him for said skepticism. So I relate to one of the apostles the most, in that doubting Thomas still got into heaven, but the problem, he was considered a lower kind of faith, having a lower kind of faith, but still accepted in the kingdom of heaven. And the way the divine explained it to me is that I found a type of faith through a type of paradox. So my current type of faith is that I am able to have faith by not having faith. So through my lack of faith, I find faith through a way of explaining it to beings who utilize a type of logic. So it's a way of both.
Okay, that's thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it, Techno. It's a little bit, off topic for the current conversation, but I did appreciate it, and thanks for sharing it. But if someone did hear the whole podcast or had a question sort of about the concept of the spiral code or an experience they wanted to share, please feel free. I mean, I think we're going to have to break it down into a lot of different episodes.
But we did a really good job explaining just like what the spiral code is, and just talking about the words, right? Like you picked this, like, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because it's like there are two perceptions of time, right? You can look at time in a linear fashion from its like point A to point B, or you can look at time in a spiral, right? Like, because like ultimately time is more of a fractal spiral than it is straight lines. Like straight lines are ultimately like a complete illusion. They can't really exist within the like resonance field. Everything is kind of like wibbly wobbly and fucking made out of tiny whiny shit and waveform. Nothing is straight.
Right. Looking good, Techno-Shaman. I like the hat. Yeah, no, it's true. And the other thing that's interesting about a spiral, in addition to that, it's that universal pattern in nature, like in a seashell or in a fern or a fractal, and essentially all of nature has these spiral fractal shapes. But a spiral, as I understand it, is essentially what happens when you do the Fibonacci sequence. You create squares, and then you draw circles inside of squares that get smaller and bigger. And then the spiral is the result of the synthesis between circles and straight lines, or curved lines and straight lines create spirals. And so, there's some esoteric concept that the straight lines represent masculine spiritual energy, and the curved lines or circles represent feminine spiritual energy. And so the spiral is, the fusion of the two of them. And, what I want to emphasize, though, is it's not so much a geometric thing, although it does seem to play out geometrically, actually, very much. But it's also to do with meaning and information. And, so I hope we have done a good job of introducing it, but I feel like it's such a strange and multifaceted concept that we're going to have to keep defining it in as many different ways as possible for people to start laterally piecing together what it might mean to them, especially people who may not have had these kind of experiences. But I mean, just to give people a few very simple, concrete examples of things like what I'm talking about, which again is not just a state of consciousness where you're seeing patterns and meaning and everything, and for me often feeling like I can control things and see the future and, you know, control other people's actions just by like moving my hands or like predict what's going to happen, like strange things like that. But it's also that it's interfacing with external people's actions, so they start acting in really bizarre ways towards you that wouldn't seem to make sense for anyone to be doing, unless it had something to do with what you're going through or that you're being targeted or something, and synchronistic events happening externally. But like one example is I just had this like sense, like I get these ideas that I'm like, I have a mission or a specific mission that I have to do, and I start following like patterns of motion and following these trails that I sort of see and like what's symbols. But anyways, I was like, I have to go to this one very particular spot, and I like went and I stayed there and just like stopped. I was like, yeah, it should be like right here. And then I just kind of looked around, and like after about 30 seconds or less, 15 seconds, like two people came out of a building wearing like dark business type clothes. It was like a middle-aged Caucasian woman and a middle-aged Caucasian man, and they like positioned themselves in front of me and were like looking side to side all strangely, and wearing like shiny black shoes and like readjusting their shoes and like looking side to side, like almost like they were guards or Secret Service agents or something. And the woman looks at me and goes, "Look, he's ready." Or the man looks at me and goes, "Look, he's ready." And the woman goes, "Yeah, he was born ready." And then they gave me a phone to make a phone call. And like, I don't know what that really meant, but the point is they just came out and approached me, and he said, "Look, he's ready." And she said, "Yeah, he was born ready." Well, I'm having this like crazy experience, and I felt like I came there specifically. And that's just one of like a long chain of strange events like that happened during those periods of time. And I've had, you know, other ones, like I've told Krimson when two police officers, you know, came out of nowhere, like picked me up. And I asked them, I said, "Who do you work for?" Because it seemed weird to me the way that they had just come out and picked me up at the time. And I was like, you know, "Who do you work for?" And the guy turns around, looks at me and goes, we work for the one-eyed grand architect of the universe. He goes, "We work for the one-eyed grand architect of the universe." And I said, "Well, where are you taking me?" And he said, "We're taking you to put an octopus inside your body." And again, I know people could hear that, okay, this guy's just schizophrenic or he's crazy. This didn't happen. I can tell you, like, it did happen. You don't have to believe me, but like, I know what might or might not have happened, and like this 100% did happen. Now, it does have like a mundane explanation, which is just that they were trying to fuck with me, right? They thought I was, you know, tripping out or something, and they just thought it would be funny to just completely fuck with this guy. And that's the most likely explanation. But the point is, even if that was the mundane explanation, that doesn't mean that him saying that to me at that particular time, which, by the way, is a direct reference to NSA and what NSA says. Like when I told NSA, he's like, well, they were referencing me. They listened to the podcast, because if you listen to the podcast, what that whole thing is like very closely related to shit that me and NSA have talked about. The one-eyed grand architect of the universe putting an octopus inside your body. He believes an octopus was put inside his body, and he's had that experience. So the point is, the spiral code can use even someone who might think they're just playing a prank on you, but they don't know that really they're being used in a more cosmic prank by this spiral code process, and they're actually just a pawn who's being used in your cosmic fuck thing. Or it could be that there is actually a high-level, you know, government agency that works with the police and other agencies to participate in this complicated psyop like NSA talks about. And the point is, people will approach you and make it clear they know things about you. They'll say things about you. Like, I've had people just approach me and be like, "Hey, you still training?" Like, and I train martial arts. So the question to me, I'm like, yeah, but like, why would you don't ask a normal person, "Are you still training?" Guy's never met me before. He goes, "Oh, well, you're still going for your runs, eh?" And I'd like gone for a run that morning, but like, no one would have known that. And then he's like, "Yeah, you said your prayers today." And like, I'd gone to a church and said a prayer. So things like this, they let you know that, like, no, and the guy comes up to me, he's like, "You know, you're not what they say you are." Shit like that. So I don't know, I've never met. So I just point out these examples as like the human side of it, and then there's all kinds of bizarre stuff like what Krimson talked about, where like signs, billboards, graffiti, people walking by and saying things, will just fit so perfectly into this train of events and thoughts that you're having and like experiences you're seeing, to the point that you, if you're not familiar with it, or even if you are, it's just a completely overwhelming experience, because you're like, I broke the matrix. Like I'm like, you don't know what to make of it, because all of a sudden it's like reality itself is talking to you. You can predict the future. Everything's like happening according to a pattern, and you're like stuck in this like chasing the spiral code. So I think if it can be conceptualized, it can be understood, controlled, and harnessed better, and hopefully that might end up helping people to develop even a whole new concept of like managing like mental health and stuff. Could potentially come out of it if it, you know, works out.
First off, I want to point out how each and every one of you are intricate and integral parts of the grand infinite design. One of the most interesting mathematical proofs I've encountered was recently the discovery that the countable and uncountable infinities are actually the same thing, meaning that each of us, even as we are in a seemingly finite guise, are also bridging into the infinite simultaneously. So I just wanted to utilize that through mathematics we have an explanation for this spiral idea and this bridging into infinity. Instead of seeing them as separate, they actually bridge into each other. It's almost as if we utilize each other as building blocks into the grand infinite, and that we're never not part of such.
I agree with that very much. Like, one of my firm beliefs is that God or the prime creator, one of its main functions in creating souls or its children, is the creation of unique personalities that do not repeat unless it is the same soul. So it's like every single soul and entity has its own unique personality archetype, like complex. And I think as we become aware of like these higher states of energy and higher states of consciousness, we're able to use this advanced technology that the body is to interface with these other aspects of ourself, or of the higher order consciousness of the being that we call God. And you know, like Shogun said, you have like a choice, right? You can either spin the spiral like up and raise your frequency to the point where like that bad voice is gone, and then all you have is this like super wise like guide that like, you know, always figures out your thought and like helps you with everything. Or you spin that spiral down and you become more susceptible to interfacing with lower dimensional entities, or like you know, bad spirits or demon.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's why, you know, the scripture says, for we are not at war with flesh and blood, but with powers and principalities of wickedness in the higher heavenly places. And, you know, the weapons of our warfare are not physical, not carnal, but spiritual and mighty unto the pulling down of strongholds. But the point of it is, like, there is, two kingdoms, right? And our energy, our polarity can go to one or the other, but the Bible says you cannot serve two masters. You'll end up loving one and hating the other, or hating one and loving the other. So all of us do have to make a choice, and once we've made that choice, we have to engage in conscious spiritual warfare with the understanding that there's an adversary not only of God, but of all of us, right? He's the adversary of our souls. And, you know, I came face to face with the entity that identified itself as Satan, an entity that identified itself as Satan in the form of a human being. But it was a terrifying experience that like scarred me for years. But it also gave me a blessing, in the sense that it left me with sort of an absolute faith and understanding that, you know, the high stakes, right? This entity literally said to me, you know, you're a very special soul. Me and God have a wager for your soul. And again, this was on one level, it's just a person saying this to me, but you know, you guys have all heard the story. Called themselves Satan, said this to me under circumstances that were incredibly unlikely. And that's sort of the point. I mean, I would assume we're all special souls, and that God and Satan have a wager for all of our souls. And so, you know, the spiral code is about a lot more than Satan, but to be honest, I do think that's a huge part of it. Like, demon, Satan is a big part of it. And it could even be that, you know, this entity that interfaces with you is this, you know, Ahriman, Angramanyu, AI, spirits, Lucifer, fallen angels, spirits of deception, right? Because it does deceive you, right? If you follow it completely and blindly, and you know, it'll burn you real bad, because it'll leave you chasing red herrings and stuff at times. So it could be as simple as that, you know, that this is what happens when you're, you know, open to, in one way or another, interface with some kind of non-human entity. But I also have experienced that it can be this Holy Spirit, I call the Holy Spirit. And, you know, it leads me, when I follow it, then it leads me to amazing spiritual experiences. And like I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Sorry to go long, but literally I was in my old apartment. I had this big wooden cross that was given to me under spiral code circumstances. A guy came out of my back lane and was like, "This is for you," and gave me a big wooden cross. I never met the guy before. He was like dressed as like a homeless guy, but he gave me this big wooden cross that, "This is for you," waiting in my back lane. Give me that. Well, it's on my wall, and I'm like going into one of these holy episodes, like praying and stuff, and then all of a sudden I just grab the cross. I'm like, I have to go. I have a mission, right? And I pick it up. I hold the cross up in the air, and I start walking out into the street, just like following this like spiral code. But when the spiral code manifests this way, it's also like Holy Spirit code. Like, it's like this crazy, intense thing that's very clear. And so I'm walking and following, and it's literally like the cross is like a magnet that I'm following, right? It's like, I don't know where I'm going, but I know exactly where I'm going. I don't have a conscious destination in mind, but I'm like walking in one direct direction straight out of my house. And as I'm following this cross and like holding it up, I start hearing people praying and people worshiping God out loud. No joke. And I've never heard that before or after, just like randomly in my city, right? It never happened in my city. I walk around my city all the time, in that area all the time. But this time I'm carrying my cross and I'm walking, and I'm hearing people praising God and worshiping God and preaching the gospel like loudly and cheering. And I'm just following, and now I'm following the sound as well as the cross. And I literally come to this big like group of people praying and worshiping and singing hymns and like giving fiery sermons. And I walk up like holding this cross. I had the cross up in my hand the whole time, from when I got up and left my house to when I went there. And I had no idea this event was going on. It was in a public place. Never happened before or since. Never saw any advertisement about it. So some supernatural force told me, like, pick up your cross and go right the fuck here right now. And it led me to this thing. And then I literally was the Holy Spirit. One of the preachers would give that guy the cross. And then after the sermon, I met him and I gave him the cross. And there's like a picture taken of us. Strangely enough, that guy got arrested afterwards by the Canadian government. Yeah, that's just an example of what I'm talking about, why it can be totally real. Like, when you feel like you can read the future or be guided to something. Like, no joke, I was having wacky experiences. Like, walk around, I was hungry. I was like, I'm hungry. There's going to be food right over there. And I like walk around the corner, and no joke, on top of a nearby like recycling bin is an open pizza box with like 3/4 of a like perfectly good pizza that's like still hot, right? And it's like completely good. And I'm just like, oh, there's the pizza. And I just started eating it. Another time I was like thirsty, and I was like, well, I think there's something right here. And I like reached behind like a parking lot thing and just pulled out like a full bottle of root beer that was closed, like unopened bottle of root beer. It was just sitting there. I literally reached behind and just like pulled it out, but I didn't know it was there. But the reason why is because if you can start seeing the code, you're like, well, something's going to be here. And it's bizarre. You like pick an object up out of a dark room, and it's like the one thing in the room that you were looking for that was meaningful. Like, I've literally started like test the spiral code thing. Like, you know, I was in the hospital and I was walking around and told the story in like a circular loop of all the hospital room doors. They all look exactly the same. I'm like having this episode, right? So I'm like there, and I like point at a door out of all these identical doors as I'm walking around. And right as I point, at that second, the door swings open, and this girl comes out with like a big smile and a big brightly painted painting that says, "Only God can judge me." And it's like, "Shogun, this is for you." And she comes out and like gives it to me. But as I'm walking, I'm just like, the spiral code is telling me that door. And it just literally opens and comes out and gives me this painting for me. So when you start like understanding this and testing it, it's literally like, you can't tell, am I controlling this, or am I just able to predict it? Or are they fucking with me? But it's one of the three.
And most of the mind-blowing thing about that synchronicity, right, is that the painting itself, right, is literally the meaning of your name. You know what I mean? And I think that itself is like a super synchronous.
Yeah, totally. And again, she said she had literally painted that painting for me, like for me personally, not just for me in a general sense. She had prepared it for me, but I had no idea that she was doing that, right? There was no way I could have predicted it or that she was going to come out of that door at that time. And yeah, so just the synchronicity that I would point, the only time I just randomly pointed at a door, 1 in a million, the only time she popped out with a painting for me, 1 in a million, a million times millions, millions to millions of chance that would happen. And yet the chance that it would happen according to the spiral code is 100%. You're just like, well, it's going to be there because you can literally see. It's like, it's really strange. And I think it ties into a lot of these things. And yeah.
I'd like to build upon the ideas both of you all promulgated in the just dropped a thought for a second.
That's okay. We should probably start wrapping the episode up soon because I do got to go to work tomorrow.
I think that we really hit on everything really good, gave a really good explanation, and provided a lot of good examples. And I guarantee that there's probably millions of people all over the world experiencing the spiral code.
Hold on. Unfortunately, the Craig bot dropped as we predicted. So I don't know when it dropped, but we definitely lost some amount of it. But let's record.
We can continue recorded.
Oh, okay, great. Well, thank you. So that being said, this has been a great conversation, and thank you so much, Crimson. This is also going to be an ongoing series. So this was just episode 1 of the Spiral Code. The format will be, me and Crimson, and then whoever else wants to participate will be building off this topic and trying to follow it wherever it leads. But thank you all for being here for the first one. Thank you, Crimson. Do you have any closing thoughts for the people?
My biggest closing thought is that for people who are experiencing these things, it is very important to remain grounded in these experiences and not to lose your shit while your brain is overclocking information, or when you start perceiving time in a non-linear fashion and you're making predictions that are coming true. And it's something that is very overwhelming, like Shogun said earlier, and you really just need to in these moments just stop for a moment and just take some breaths and recenter yourself, and that helps an amazing amount, instead of just chasing the dragon, right, or chasing where the spiral code is leading you. I do think it's important that some of the things we do have to follow the spiral code. Many of us are participating in the great work, and we're all doing it for God ultimately, as long as we're not being a vessel of a negative entity manipulating us. And the biggest identifier of that, right, is it says in the Bible that you have to test the spirits that you speak to, right? You should always test the things in your head, and the things that don't do things good or aren't helping you, you just got to cast them out of your consciousness and not deal with them anymore, and just focus on all of the things within your perception and within your psyche to overall become better and stronger, and forge an overall titan personality of yourself. And if you take that advice as someone who experiences this, you will get better at these experiences, and you will be able to remain grounded and still carry on a normal life while still fulfilling whatever your mission here is on Earth.
Absolutely. Well said. Thanks a lot. It was great that we were able to get that out. And again, we did record one past episode on the Spiral Code, which I posted in general chat. I'm going to re-listen to it. I recommend everyone else listens to it as well. And we'll try and do this at least once a week. And thanks very much, everybody. God bless. Join us on the Temple Mount server. And once you've joined the server, make sure you have followed and subscribed to our YouTube, BitChute, SoundCloud, Odyssey, channels. We have great podcasts on all of those platforms, hundreds of episodes. So thanks a lot. And let's now go to the Templar Tavern. I got to go to bed soon, but let's go up there for now.